You want to live your life in a way that when you leave this world, that you rejoice and the world cries. So that and that is something that I go by, to live your life in a way that when you leave this world, that you feel pretty good, that you've done what you needed to do, and that the world will miss you because of the contributions that you made.
Introducing The Vixen Voice, a podcast for ambitious women entrepreneurs ready to move into their feminine essence, live their truth, and unlock their full potential. I'm your host, April Roberts, and each week I'll be interviewing inspiring women who decided to take a leap of faith to pursue their dream. Women who believe that they were born for something bigger. Hi, and welcome back to another episode of The Vixen Voice. I'm so excited because today we have on my friend and client, Linda Howard. You can see she looks nice and colorful, just like me. We get along quite well. She has an amazing personality, but she's also darn smart. So I'm actually going to read her official biography, which I normally don't do, but there's so many things that she covers that I want to start there. So Fatima Linda Howard boasts over 35 years of expertise in law, compliance, and DEI, renowned for roles as an attorney, consultant, entrepreneur, and international speaker. She leads With Linda Howard and Alternatives, specializing in DEI, ethics, and compliance transformations. Her leadership fosters inclusive and ethical cultures with skillful communication, compassion, and transparency. So, Linda, welcome. So good to have you today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And you guys can see why I don't like to read formal. I'm not great with the teleprompter. But there's so much that you do, Linda. And the thing that we didn't mention is that you're the author of Crescent Over Crossroads, just this phenomenally amazing book that I really hope we can dig into today. But before we even get to that, what I'd love to ask you, Linda, is I know you have many stories. And by the way, if you want to hear all of Linda's stories or most of them, check out Crescent Over Crossroads. Not only is it a fascinating book, but she's an amazing writer. So it's such a great read. So definitely check that out on Amazon. We'll have links below. But before we get into that conversation, Linda, what I'd love to ask is you have so many stories, but could you share one or two pivotal stories who really, that really crafted this amazing woman that I see here before me?
I'm asked that a lot, and it's very difficult for me to kind of get into one story because I say it's not one thing, but it's all things. And, it's a combination of the family that I grew up in, the religious guidance that I have, and also my work experience. But if I were to say one of the things that's had a real impact on me and that has driven the purpose in my life is having gone through the experience of, I didn't even know this terminology until I was in it, was serial grief. And, we had over a very short period of time, a lot of losses in my family. There were 7 siblings and now there's 2 of us. And so I went through long periods of illnesses with some of my family. Some of them was sudden, but it really did give me an opportunity to look at kind of our health system and how health inequities impact certain communities. It also let me see the kind of the meaning of life, and I started to really look at that our life here, that we're just passing through. And it's very brief. So for me, like just having all of these deaths in my family, I really understood that tomorrow is not promised to us. So I got to this point in my life where I wanted to live a purpose-driven life. And I would say that, that experience of loss and understanding that, our time here is very brief really did impact the direction of my life.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And, I want to pause a moment because, as you mentioned, like the serial grief was so real for you. And as you talked about, it led you to want to live a purpose driven life. And I know you're a very spiritual individual like myself. And so you were kind of already guided, right? And maybe not. Maybe you delved further into it after the serial grief. So, like, that's what I'd really love to hear because I know you also chose to completely change your life after you went through your episodes of serial grief. I mean, really, and really doing it to save yourself so that you could persevere. So, kind of share with us some changes you chose to make to be more purpose driven after your experience.
Well, the most recent death was that had that impact was the death of my mom, and that was 3 years ago. And I had spent so much time being a caregiver for other family members and also being a caregiver for my mom. And so after my mother's passing, I thought that it would be an opportunity for me to be able to explore some of the things in my life that I had not had the opportunity to explore because of being a caregiver or wanting to be close to my family during those times. And so I started to say to myself, if not now, then when? And and it made me really take a deeper look at, my religion and wanting to understand more about it. It also drove me to want to move out of the country for a little while. And I use that word move out of the country very lightly because I come back and forth a lot, but I've been living in Morocco for about 2 years now. And the purpose of that was because I wanted to be able to live in a country where I was not the minority in terms of my religious beliefs. I'm Muslim, and in the U.S., there's very small Muslim population. Oftentimes, you have to travel a distance to go to a masjid, and you stand out in terms of your beliefs. You stand out in terms of your dress code. And I wanted to be someplace where I didn't feel like the minority. Now, of course, I was a minority in terms of I wasn't Moroccan, but still I found that as a Muslim I was embraced. And I also wanted to learn Arabic. And all my life I had always told myself that I was bad at languages. And so I said, hey, if not now, then when? And so those were some changes that I made in my life. And I started to then have my work around what was important to me as opposed to the other way around.
I love that because I like to say, I coach and help women design their business around their life. And you had kind of
Yes.
already done that before we met. And then, you have some new areas that you want to go into. Well, not new, but areas that you've done for a while that you want to focus on more that we're going to chat about today. And I think now would be a great time. I shared with you, I just love the first paragraph of your book. It's the introduction. So I'd actually just love to read it right now because it's
Okay.
it's so succinct and summarizing what your book is about, what your life has been about, and all these changes. So imagine standing at the crossroads where race, religion, and gender intersect, caught in the swirling winds of societal expectations, personal beliefs, and professional aspirations. You're an African American woman, a professional striving to make an impact, and a devout Muslim in a society that often misconstrues your faith. This is not a hypothetical scenario, but my lived reality, a story interwoven with the vibrant threads of my identity. African American, female, and Muslim. And you go on to talk about how the narrative is imbued with resilience, authenticity, and courage. And I just love that. I got goosebumps as I was reading that paragraph again because, so often we see, as you know, I don't watch the news because I don't love what they spout on the news, but, we see the news, we see what's going on in the world, but really until we have someone we love and care about, it doesn't impact us the same way I feel, right? And so I just love that you interweave your personal story with your religion, your race, and your gender, because, these are such hot topics in the world, as they should be. But I love that you bring your personal story in, because I feel it helps people to maybe understand at a deeper level. Obviously, they can't be you, but they can be empathetic and really understand. And I also believe when we tell our story, the person reading thinks back to their story, right? So, I
Yes.
mean, obviously, a reader is going to think, okay, I'm not a Muslim African American woman, but I am, XYZ, and here's the challenges I had. And I think to honor our stories and who we are as human beings here on earth is super important. So, Linda, what I'd love to ask is, what led you to write the book?
There was a number of things. I wanted to write the book because, one, it was therapeutic for me, to be able to tell my story. I also thought it was important to tell the story because I thought it was important for other people to hear the story. Because I think, from the feedback that I've gotten from a cross section of people, they have seen themselves in that story, even though they may not share the same characteristics as me.
Yes.
Because oftentimes people are balancing their career goals with their values. And I wanted to be able to tell that story and have people understand that life is a journey, and that you go through bumps in the road. Sometimes you move a little bit off your course, and then you have something that brings you back to your center, and you may go off a little bit, and you go through dilemmas, and you struggle with your identity, struggle with your values, struggle with your priorities. And I wanted people to see that that they were not alone in that struggle, and to also be some inspiration for people who might be going through that struggle, for them to understand that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that you just have to stay steady on the course. And then when I looked at some of the challenges that we're having, not only in this country but worldwide, in terms of the religious intolerance, and I found that most of the time the intolerance came because people didn't know one another. And there are so many people, particularly in America, that feel as if they don't know any Muslims. So whatever they hear about the religion, hear about Muslims through the media, is what they believe. And so they don't feel like they know any. And so I wanted people at the end of reading my book for them to say that they know me, and therefore they now know a Muslim, whether it's someone who's not a Muslim, or say even a Muslim from another country. Because I've been told, about Muslims from other countries, that they've learned a lot about the African American Muslim experience. So there was a lot in it that I wanted to be able to tell the story. I wanted to tell the story around inequities. I wanted to be able to tell the story in terms of where particularly African American and African American women may not feel as if they belong in places. And, as an attorney, there's a whole chapter that I have. I think it might even be 2 chapters that I talk about my experience in law school, in my experience in the law firms. And then I also tell the story of some of my friends and colleagues, and how many of us are no longer in the law firms, and how not only did the firms but also the industry lost some very good talent because we did not feel that we fit in. And I thought it was important, because I talked about, I went to University of Pennsylvania Law School, which is, a top law school, Ivy League law school. And I was telling the story of people who went to elite schools. We were very well trained. We were taught to fight. We were taught to advocate. We were taught to communicate. And if we threw up our hands and said enough is enough, I can imagine what people go through who did not have the training that we had, that did not have the skills that we have, around communication. So I thought it was really important for people to be able to see that, to say, wow, if these individuals who were, spent a lot of money and time going through this education process, going to the top schools, being high achievers all of their life, said, I'm out, you know, that I thought organizations really needed to look at, their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion and say, what is it not only from the perspective of the individual who says I'm out, but from the organization in the industry in the world that loses this talent.
Linda, you were talking about, the challenges of the legal field and with your religion, your background, and your race, and how challenging it was. And, I can share, I too left the legal field because it does not tend to be one sustainable for if you want to have a different lifestyle. Let's put it that way, whatever the different
Right.
is. So, like, but I hear you, and I hate to hear, because to your point, it ain't easy to make it through law school, especially an Ivy League law school. And like you said, you're well trained, you're an advocate, you know how to articulate well on your behalf. And so if that's challenging, what must it be like for individuals who don't have this training, right? Or maybe it's the same either way. So what are your thoughts on that, and what have you experienced in your life?
Well, I think that it's not unique to the legal profession, but I wanted to use that as an example
Sure.
because I thought it was like if we are having challenges, then what does it say for the rest of the world? And oftentimes,
Mm-hmm.
people go into work and they check themselves at the door. Basically, they're not taking their authentic
Yeah.
selves into work, and that is their way of coping. But it's not healthy because it definitely, when you have to be other than yourself, it really does create
Mm-hmm.
real health issues. It can create mental health issues, depression and unhappiness, and those things then lead to physical health issues. And so, I often tell people, and I know it's not a easy task, but for them to find work that aligns with who they are. And oftentimes I hear from people, "Oh, I
Yes.
have to do this in order to have a job, or in order to have certain friends, or to order to find a mate." And my advice is, those are not your people. You need to find your people. Find the
Mm-hmm.
people who will accept you for who you are. And so, having these conversations, particularly with younger people, like when you start talking about at the university level, that they start finding careers that align with who they are. And that doesn't mean that, like,
Yeah.
when I think about the legal profession, it doesn't mean you can't be a lawyer, but maybe you don't go and be a lawyer in a type of firm that doesn't align with who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, when coming through Ivy League law schools, that's what the push is. The push is that, you push to get the best grades, to get into the best schools, and then there's a push to get the best jobs. And oftentimes the best jobs
Yep.
means those large law firms. And oftentimes those environments just are not very welcoming for people to be their authentic selves. And that was
Mm-hmm.
what I found to be my experience.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I too worked at a very large firm right out of school, and the interesting part was I love the social part of it because we were very socially connected working there, and I'm very social, but when I look back I'm like, what was I doing this kind of work? Like, now that I understand myself better, how I flow energetically, what's important to me and working on, it's kind of like it wasn't aligned at all with who I am and what I want to be doing, right? And that's totally different than what you're talking about. But I love this. I love this talk about authenticity. And, I grew up in a household where we are encouraged to be who we are and to speak our truth. And I'm very
Mhm.
appreciative to my parents for that upbringing because it allowed me at a very early age to say, hmm, this is how the partners' lives are. This is not the life I want to have when I'm their age, right? So maybe this isn't the best career path for me. And but not everyone is at that point so young, because often we're still discovering who we are. And I
Right.
kind of love to talk about your upbringing, Linda, when we mention that, because you have diversity of religion in your family, right? And so I'd love to hear a little bit
Absolutely.
about that.
Yeah, my family was definitely a place where you learned respect and tolerance and communication.
Mhm.
In my immediate family, we had a number of religions. We had Baptists, we had Jehovah Witness, and we had Muslims. And we negotiated what holidays were must for everyone, and we decided that Thanksgiving, because it wasn't a religious holiday. And so that was the one where everybody came to
Right.
Thanksgiving dinner. There were Christmas
Yeah.
dinners, and sometimes the Muslims in the family came to Christmas dinners because we felt like it was more important to spend time with family than to say, oh, I don't celebrate Christmas. The non-Muslims in the family recognize, Ramadan, and sometimes we would have to plan meals around them, like, oh, well, they don't eat till after the sun go down, so we need to do the dinner at a time when they can participate. So, all of these were discussions in the family. My two oldest brothers, one was Jehovah Witness, the other one was Muslim, and both of them really did study their religious text, the Bible and the Quran. And it was just really interesting to hear their discussions, because they could actually cite to
Hmm.
what each of the texts said, and what they were seeing, that there was a lot of similarity. So you would hear one say, oh, the Quran says
Yes.
this, and then my other brother would say, oh, the Bible says the same thing, we say it like this, but it was the same concept. So the other thing that I also learned was, the commonalities between the religions, as opposed to looking for
Hmm.
the differences. And there were times when we had to really have to understand other person's religious beliefs. Like, I'll give one example. Is we were celebrating my mother's 90th birthday, and my niece, who was Jehovah Witness, didn't want to come because she said, we don't celebrate
Hmm.
birthdays. And, my mother really wanted her there. So she didn't come, because by the time we realized it was an issue for her, it was too late for us to do anything about it. But now, when my mother turned 95, we had a conversation and said, okay, we won't do a birthday celebration. We'll do a celebration of life. And I talked to my brother and I said, okay, what's the problems with birthdays? And it was an issue around, oh, the cake and the candle and the singing the happy birthday. It has, pagans origins. And so I said, so if we eliminate the
Mm.
happy birthday song, the cake and the candles, and we do it as a celebration of mommy's life as opposed to a birthday, do you think your daughter will come? And so that's what we did. And so we
Yeah.
weren't a stickler about, oh, we got to sing happy birthday. We got to, and my mother was like, I'd rather have my granddaughter there than to have a birthday cake with candles. And so that's what we did. And so for
Right.
her 95th, we did a celebration of life. And then we were blessed to have her here when she was 100. And we did the same thing when she was 100. And so that
Wow.
was a way where we really said, let me understand what the challenge is, and let us find a way that we can be together as a family. As where some families might have been really upset, oh, why can't she come, she should come, but we really, work for that solution. And so those are the training ground for me, so to speak, that led me into my work of religious tolerance,
Hmm.
because I experienced it in my own family, and I know that it can work. I know that you can have differences in religion and
Yes.
find harmony. And if we could do it at the dinner table, then, in that close
Mm.
environment, I know people can do it in work environments, and they can do it in communities, and they can
Yeah.
do it, in society. So it's something that I get very passionate about, because I know that it can be done.
Hmm. And your story is so beautiful because, what I'm hearing is your family prioritized being together over other things, right? Not violating core beliefs and principles of each other, but the prioritization was, let's be together. How do we make this happen? And I feel we could have so much better conversations and a better world if we walked around prioritizing unconditional love and compassion, right? Like, no, will I ever actually walk in your steps? No, I will never fully understand what it's like to be you walking around Earth, right? But I sure am interested to hear, and I'd love to hear what you've learned and what you bring to the table. And, I'd like to share what I've learned and what I bring to the table. And I just think if we could prioritize having these compassionate, loving relationships, I mean, just think if
Yes.
everyone's walking around in compassion and unconditional love, all the problems of the world just went away, right? Except those we don't have control over. And then we can work on it together. So yes, I love your family as a metaphor of how we could be having conversations in the world and how we could be approaching each other. So I love that you have such a personal meaning behind the work you do. So let's talk a little bit. I know you touched on religious tolerance, but you really do a lot of speaking and consulting on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know when we first met, and I had a previous client who had issues because she was a consultant in this area, and it got to the point where corporations and different entities weren't having the funds for it that they had had before, right? Or it got pushed to the HR department instead of the CEO, which made it harder. And so you and I talked about it, and you were sharing, yeah, there's certain elements that persevere and are important. So let's kind of dig into that and what you particularly focus on when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, because you're so much more articulate about it than I am.
Well, I think all of it is important, so I want to start there. I think that
Yes, true.
there are some things that I particularly focus on just because of my experience and my background and why
Mm-hmm.
I have certain passion around it. But oftentimes when people talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, they are really they're really very limited in their understanding. So they think that diversity, equity, and
Mm-hmm.
inclusion means affirmative action. And so
Mm-hmm.
the whole discussion around diversity, equity, and inclusion turns to an affirmative action discussion, which I still think, is important, but that is not
Mm-hmm.
diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so one of the questions that I constantly be am asked is the work in diversity, equity, and inclusion dying? Is the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion
Mm-hmm.
dying? And I look at it in several places, and I say, when we look at issues around health equity, I say that is a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue. And that is not dying as long as we have communities dying as a
Mm-hmm.
result of health inequities. Um, is diversity, equity, and inclusion dying? No, not as long as religious intolerance is causing people to die and causing the kind of conflict that we
Mm-hmm.
see around the world. So I focus on religious tolerance. I also focus on health equity, and I focus on gender equity. As you know, those are kind of key
Mm-hmm.
areas. And the health equity is an area that really aligns with my professional background. I've been in healthcare for nearly 20 years now
Mm-hmm.
as a worked for a little while in operations, and then I worked as a compliance officer for both health systems and also for insurance companies. So I have a lot of the inside
Mm-hmm.
information in terms of what happens in the health system. I mentioned earlier in terms of the losses, and so I know that, some of the losses in my family were preventable, premature deaths that maybe had we had
Mm-hmm.
a health system that was more aligned and with the communities that they served, maybe I would not have experienced some of the losses that I've
Mm-hmm.
experienced. So and then when I kind of talking a little bit more about health equity, I asked a question to healthcare providers like, is this aligned with your mission? If you don't have equitable care, is that really fulfilling your mission as an organization? As physicians, is this really,
Right.
when you said I want to be a doctor, is this really what you had in mind, that there would be communities that would not be served, that there would be communities that would not have the access to care, that did not have trust in you as a physician because you're not dealing with some of these, some of these issues. And at the same time, I have the compassion and the empathy for the healthcare system because I know how difficult of a system it is to
Hmm.
navigate. It's one of the most highly
Hmm.
regulated spaces, industries in the world. You have medical guidelines that are constantly changing. You have the requirements of the insurance companies in terms of billing and what when you need a prior authorization to do certain services, how you have to document. So you have all of these that the healthcare industry is dealing with, and then you have all of the issues that the community is dealing with. And so for me, I'm looking for
Hmm.
those solutions. How do I help people build those
Yeah.
competencies that they need? And so when I talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm talking about it also from a perspective of helping organizations create that culture and also helping individuals
Hmm.
build the competencies that they need, those personal and global competencies that they need in order to fulfill the mission. Individuals with this purpose in their life,
Hmm.
that they have these competencies to do that.
Yeah, I love that so much. And one thing I love about what I get to do as a coach and consultant is I'm constantly learning. So you just did a series of speeches that I took a look at, and we were kind of working through different things, and I learned so much, and it was eye-opening, even these short speeches for me, because a lot of times you hear these big terms, right? And you're like, I don't really understand what that means. And I highly encourage you, find Linda on YouTube, watch some of her videos, read her book. Really, I think as being a good human being, it's important to understand these issues. I mean, that's my personal belief. So like I'm so grateful you came into my life so that I could really have my eyes open to some things that I didn't understand. We were talking about, in one of your speeches, you were talking about AI and how it can be used disparagingly. It basically does not equal health equity, because the biomarkers, and this is biology, right, of one group is different than another, and how sometimes they will misdiagnose because maybe the data's biased. So again, you'll articulate it so much better than me if we could kind of dig into that. But as we know, everyone's pushing for AI, and we have to be careful.
Yeah, AI is wonderful. I think it makes our lives a lot easier in a lot of respects. And so I don't discourage the use of AI. I say that we need to have more scrutiny over the AI that we use,
Mhm.
that the AI needs to be subjected to tests. There needs to be more transparency in terms of the data that is used to inform the outcomes, the algorithms. So what happens is that for a lot of those that develop AI, there's not a transparency because they look at it as this is our secret
Mhm.
sauce. So we're not going to tell you what we used. But if we don't know the data that went into it, it becomes very difficult to make a
Yep.
determination as to whether or not the data includes everyone. So you have situations where you have AI that's used to make diagnosis, like for instance, there's for to look at skin conditions, and if all of the data
Mhm.
is based on lighter color skin, it can misdiagnose for darker skin. You have issues with
Mhm.
AI that is used to make a determination around kidney function. And oftentimes,
Mhm.
this AI is biased against African Americans. And so, as a result, it's not an accurate diagnosis about the level of functionality of the kidneys. So they don't get the treatment as quicker, or they may not get put on a transplant list as quickly as they should
Mhm.
because of the use. of AI. You have AI that takes in that uses algorithms that include things like looking at putting people into programs, and it will make a determination based on how much individuals or communities spend on healthcare, and say, okay, if they don't spend a lot on healthcare, then that must mean that they don't need the healthcare. Well, that's a flawed assumption. so so
Right.
the AI itself is creating situations where there is misdiagnosis. Individuals are not being put into programs that they need to be put into. They're not being put on transplant lists as timely as they should. And this is like, and particularly, the
Mm-hmm.
issue around the transplant, the kidney transplant diagnosis is really something that is very personal to me, because my father was a dialysis
Mm-hmm.
patient, and he went on dialysis when I was very young, died when I was 15. And then later on, my brother was a dialysis patient. And so just to think that, if AI was in place and that diagnosis didn't happen in order for them to get to care when they needed it, or perhaps they weren't, put on a transplant list as quickly as they should have been, that's really, disturbing to me, because I understand that these issues around health inequities, they don't just impact the individual. They impact families. You lose providers in families. You have other family members that have to stop their livelihood to be caregivers. You have children that loses their parents prematurely. And they also affect communities, because the
Mm-hmm.
community is made up of individuals, and the health of the community impacts the productivity of the community and the viability of the community. So it is a really big issue.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the health equity, and then when you start bringing in AI, is AI helping or is it magnifying the issue? And I think in some respects it is magnifying the issue,
Mm-hmm.
unless we begin to really, hold those who are creating the AI accountable and saying, no, you have to be subjected to third party audits. There has to be more
Mm-hmm.
transparency. And and the lawyer and the compliance officer and me says, and we need to have more regulations. The healthcare industry is one, as I said, is one of the most
Mm-hmm.
highly regulated industries in the world. How is it that AI has slipped through? This would not happen with anything else. If you were testing a drug, they would want to know who was in the trial. Was it just women? Okay, therefore we can't really say whether or not this is effective for men. So, but when it comes to AI, it's all of the secrecy around it, and it's something that we really have to look at the impact of it and say, okay, do we need more regulations? Those who are buying the AI, those who are using the AI, they have to scrutinize it more. They need to be able to check the outcomes and
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, let me look at my patient. Was this a good outcome for my patient? And be able to start making some determination themselves. Like, am I finding that it is misdiagnosing um, certain categories of individuals, and then give that feedback so there can be adjustments in the algorithms.
What I'm hearing is you're talking about the double-edged sword of compounding, right? As you said, AI magnifies benefits because you could make a diagnosis so much faster, but it's also going to magnify the issues, right? And it's kind of like, compounding. If it's something good, time compounds the good, but time also compounds the bad. So the challenge with AI is we don't have the element of time. It's such exponential compounding so quickly that that's why I think it has to be paid attention to. So Linda, share with us quickly, and then I'd love to pivot and talk about your traveling a little bit because you are so
Okay.
multifaceted. So how can you help individuals in the healthcare agencies, insurance companies? Like, what services do you provide, as a keynote speaker and consultant where you can come in and be of value to their organization?
Well, I definitely do keynote speeches on these topics. So I think organizations where, they're having their conferences, also, health systems
Mhm.
where they may be having, internal speakers to be able to speak to their providers, their physicians, their nurses. I'm available for those things. But I also have some programs that I have developed in order to be able to help healthcare providers build the competencies that they need in order to, one, recognize the health inequities and begin to address those health inequities, how to begin to build trust in the communities that they serve. I worked for managed care organizations for a number of years, and I also think that there are some opportunities there for improvement, and some of the programs that I do to build competencies could also help with them as well. With respect to religious tolerance, I think that there's really a need right now in the universities. We've seen that the colleges and
Yes.
universities have really gone through some serious crisis as a result of the
Mhm.
latest Israeli Gaza conflict, and a lot of it is really, centered around deeply held beliefs. And so there is a need, one, to
Mhm.
understand the religious communities involved, but also to be able to have some of those difficult
Mhm.
conversations. So one of the programs that I have is to facilitate some of those difficult conversations, but also to help individuals develop the competencies that they need for them to be able to facilitate those difficult conversations on an ongoing basis. And, one of the advantages of having the background in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also in compliance, I'm also able to work with organizations in terms of being able to streamline some of their processes, and also to develop the policies and procedures that they need in order to ensure that, the things that they identify as opportunities for improvement, that they can then put those into policies and therefore put them into practice.
Yeah, I love it. I love how you combine the human side with the more administrative and logical components. I think that's just incredibly valuable. So, again, check out Linda. You can find her on her YouTube channel and her website, and all of the information is below. But if you want to hear more about any of these topics, go there, reach out to Linda. She's available as a speaker, a consultant to help your organization, and read her book. It's a great read, it's a great story. So let's talk about the other aspect of your book, Linda, which is travel. So you just took a huge trip, a huge pilgrimage. Can you share with us about that? And by the way, go to her Instagram and you'll see video of this trip. So check it out.
Okay. Well, I like to say I'm taking people along with me. So my Instagram, all of my handles are with Linda Howard. So if you go to Instagram, just remember you're with me with Linda Howard. That's my Instagram. It's also my website. To reach me, it's engage at with Linda Howard. And so I really took people along with me on my journey during the month of Ramadan. And for those of you that don't know, that's one of the most holy times for Muslims, where we fast for the entire month from dawn to dusk, and it's no water, no food. It's also a lot of other religious rituals that take place during that time.
Mhm.
So I divided the month into three parts. And I decided that I wanted to spend time in three of the great masjids of the world. And my first stop was in Morocco, which is where I live. But I traveled from Marrakesh, where I live, to Casablanca. And I rented an apartment across from one of the great masjids, Hassan II, which is also referred to as the Mosque on the Water. And I had the experience of doing prayers every evening there. And it was beautiful because you get the sound of the ocean as you're walking, hearing the call to prayer. The acoustics in that mosque is wonderful. And it's just a very beautiful mosque. The second part of my journey, I went
Mhm.
to Abu Dhabi, and I went to Sheikh Zayed Mosque, which is also another one of the great masjids of the world. And my third and probably most impactful and wonderful stop was to Mecca. So the I spent time in Mecca during the last 10 days of Ramadan, which is, the month is considered the one of the holiest months. And then the last 10 days are the holiest days of the month. So I spent time in Mecca and did my Umrah, which is considered the lesser Hajj. So it was just a wonderful experience. And I documented it along the way. And I kind of unfolded the story. So when I was in Morocco, I was like, oh, this is my first stop. Stay tuned for the second stop. And then I got to Abu Dhabi and I was like, I'm here. And then when I got to Mecca, I let people know this is the final stop. I'm at one of the great masjids of the world, and this one is the greatest. So it was a wonderful experience. One of the videos got over 10,000 views. Another one got over 1,000 likes. So people really, commented and really enjoyed being able to go along on the journey with me. So this was a really exciting Ramadan for me.
I love it. What a beautiful experience. I think that sometimes in the current modern world, at least in the West, we undervalue the experience of praise. Like religion has become so mental for so many people. And, one thing I love is my healing and prayer group. We listen to the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic. And it's just so beautiful. I mean, of course, we know what it's being said. We can't understand, but like it's much more experiential. It's like your heart's listening instead of your brain. And so
Yes.
I just thought about that when you were talking about the acoustics and everything in Casablanca. And like, again, I'm getting chills because when you really have that deeply spiritual experience, like it's so beautiful and life altering. And you understand because so much of it has to be experienced. God is so much greater than what we can understand in our mind, right? So through these experiences, I feel that I get closer to him. So thank you for sharing your experiences and also your understanding. I loved when you were talking about your family debating the Bible and the Quran, and it wasn't really debating. It was really like, hey, this says the same thing this says. It just says it in a different way. And in my experience of studying the world's major religions, they do have the same core principles. And
Yes.
so for me, I'm kind of like, what are we all fighting over? Like, I don't understand this. It comes down to love and being there with God. So Linda, I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing, from your point of view, the experiences you've had and what you've come to realize about the world and how you're making a difference. I mean, my next question is, you wrote this beautiful book where people can enjoy the journey and hopefully go deeper into some of these topics. And obviously, you had a purpose. So, what's your hope for the world when you're coming out of writing this book?
Really, my hope for the world is that people get an opportunity to understand the journey of an individual
Mhm.
and be able to see themselves in that journey and to understand that how life is a journey and be able to build that resilience and to get through difficult times and understand that there is light at the end of the tunnel. So I wanted people to really, because I wrote the book, I chose a really different format for the book. At the end of every chapter, there's a section that has, insight, reflection, but it's also a section that really talks about, things, how people can incorporate this to their into
Mhm.
their own life. And some of the feedback that I have gotten, and this has been from people who are Muslims and non-Muslims, is that they got lessons around resilience.
Mhm.
It had them really think about, to do some introspection. And I'm hoping that this
Mhm.
book inspires people to engage in conversations that they would not ordinarily engage in, for
Mhm.
them to interact with people that they would not ordinarily interact with, and for them to really be able to do some of their own introspection and really assess what their values are and what's important to them. And hopefully, we'll get more people that is living a purpose driven life and be able to experience the joy that I'm experiencing and being authentic and having and living this life that is filled with purpose.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. I like that you pointed out resilience because I think it's so important to today's world. I was a guest on a podcast last night, and, we were kind of talking about that, how when you look back over your life, some of the most impactful moments are what you've overcome, right? And yet we live in
Yes.
a world where we expect everything to be easy and go our way. And that's just not what creates us as a person and really changes us. So, Linda, I love to ask all my guests, at the Vixen Gathering, we are very into harnessing our feminine energy and bringing more love into the world. So, my question for you is, when do you feel your feminine energy the most? Like, what activities or at what moments do you feel your feminine energy flowing?
Hmm. I don't know that there's a time when I don't feel it. So
I have that with you. I love it.
yeah, especially as I begin to embrace more of being my authentic self, and as a
Mhm.
woman, that is who I am. And I just want to,
Mhm.
add, because you mentioned around the resilience and the feminine energy, and I just want to, mention my mom, who was really a
Yeah.
real example of that feminine energy that inspired me, and also her resilience. My mother,
Mhm.
buried two husbands, five
Mm.
children, and one grandchild. And for a lot of people, this would have really broken them,
Mhm.
with two, but five. And my mother lived to be 101, and she was in good
Mhm.
health all the way up until like the last couple of months of her life. She lived by herself all the way up into the, over 100 years old. She was still cooking for herself. And I look at my mom, and
Love it.
with all of that, my mother still had faith that tomorrow would be better. And she constantly said that,
Mhm.
God will not give you any more than you will bear. And you will find that being said in the Bible, and you'll have it said in the Quran. And so, and that resilience is, to me, when I look at my mom, that is a feminine energy, that energy to be able
Yes.
to to be able to hold on to hope, and to have that resilience, because women have to deal with a lot, and we, get through it,
Mhm.
juggling families and careers, and the things that are placed on our shoulders. So, when I tap into that feminine energy and I tap into that resilience, it's because of the mom that I had, and looking and watching her life, and
Mhm.
and how she persevered.
I love that. And the attributes you shared about your mom, first of all, thank you for sharing that because I think so many women need to hear that. We have this addiction in the current world to negative thoughts and negative feelings. And I call it an addiction because it is adrenaline being pumped out, right? And it's important to realize that you can choose to live differently, right? You're not stuck in that pattern. You can choose to live differently. And your mom is a beautiful example of that. And her attitude is exactly why she lived to be 101. I think I share with you, my goal is to live to be 124. So there's no room for negativity in my life, right? I'm really focused on joy and loving life. And it's amazing when you change your way of thinking because because time becomes of less essence when you think like that, right? Because we have this constant pressure of time and I have to get things done, and removing that and removing the negative thoughts and energies. I mean, I'm with you. I love when you said, I want other people to experience the joy I have. That's how I feel. And that's why I do the work I do, because when you release all of this and you become your resilient, beautiful, feminine energy self, life becomes magical. So I love it. Thank you, Linda. My final question is, what color is your feminine energy?
Red.
I like it. Fiery, fiery. So as we talked about, mine currently is magenta, like a purpley, actually this exact color right here. And Linda was teasing me the other day. This is why I love my clients. She said, I thought your favorite color was royal blue, which is the color she had. I was like, yeah, that's the former favorite color. Magenta's the new, but I love them both. So, we can evolve, but I love that I got called out on that one. So Linda, it's been such a pleasure to have you here today. It's been such an honor to work with you and see the work you're doing. I'm sure that everyone else is touched by your stories like I am. I got goosebumps so many times during this interview. So thank you so much. I mean, I think that's what life is about, to really understand and experience things and experience joy, like you said. One of my missions is to bring women back to a loving, fun relationship with God, because we've been trained in so many other ways. So thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story. Everyone, as I always say, the world needs more love. So my challenge for you is, how can you show up this week more loving to everyone that you run into? We're told to love our enemies, and can you truly do that, right? Every day, forgive and love yourself and forgive and love everyone else. It's such a beautiful reset, and life really does become magical. So Linda, as we wrap up, do you have any other closing messages or words for all the amazing women listening to us today?
Well, one of the things that this has been a proverb that has guided me, and I will share that with you. And I'm not even sure where it's from, but it says, when I came into this world, the world rejoiced, and I cried." You want to live your life in a way that when you leave this world, that you rejoice and the world cries. So that and that is something that I go by, to live your life in a way that when you leave this world, that you feel pretty good, that you've done what you needed to do, and that the world will miss you because of the contributions that you made. And so it's a short time. What are we going to do with those years in between? And that is a proverb that has resonated with me, and so I share it with you, and I challenge you all to do that. And you will hear me close out a lot of my talks by telling people it's time to level up.
Yes. Love it. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Again, check out the show notes. If you have not subscribed to the Vixen Voice, go subscribe. You can subscribe on our website, vixengathering.com. And when you subscribe, every week we send you the amazing resources, how to get in touch with our guest, all that important information delivered right to your inbox. So it's the best way to take advantage of the information you hear when we're chatting together. And if you'd like to be on the Vixen Voice, or you have a question you'd like me to answer here, just email us at team@vixengathering.com, or join my Facebook group, Abundant Business Women, where we're constantly asking for input. So everyone, thank you so much. Linda, thank you so much for your time today. It's so lovely seeing you. Have a beautiful day, everyone.
Likewise.
And I will talk to you soon. Thanks again for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to hit subscribe so future episodes are automatically downloaded directly to your device. And if you want access to today's show notes, including links to all the resources we mentioned, visit vixengathering.com/podcast. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week for another episode of The Vixen Voice.